Good day, friends. No matter where you're watching or when you're watching this, we're glad that you're here. And today's service might seem a little bit different from some in the past. We're now kind of moving into this time where we're devoting some of our time to our online content. We don't want to leave this behind, but we're also putting more energy into in-person services as things have started to open up again. So this service is going to be a little bit shorter, but if that's kind of a disappointment to you, if you would like us to go back to the services we had before the summer with the hymns and extra prayers and all of that, let us know. It's not that we're abandoning that format, it's just that we're trying to figure out where we're going and how to navigate in this new world. So if you want to leave us a comment, either saying, yeah, I love the way you're doing this now, or I miss what you were doing before, leave a comment down below. As I've already alluded to, we are back open and welcoming people into our worship on Sunday mornings. And when I say welcome, I really mean it. We put a great big new sign, if you haven't seen it, out in front of the church that says, at St. Andrew's United, you are welcome here. And we do everything we can to live out that radical hospitality as demonstrated by Jesus. If you come to our doors, we will do everything we can to let you have a place in our community. It doesn't matter whether you're gay or straight, transgender, bisexual, tall, short, poor, rich. It doesn't matter. If you want to join us as we aspire to walk the way of Christ, if you want to join us in trying to figure out what the way of Christ is and what it means for us in our world, you're welcome here. Come and join us. It's a really good place to be. But for now, please join me in prayer. Holy God, we ask that you bless this gathering, whether it's people here worshiping in person or those who are gathered online. Be with all your children so that we may know your presence. May you inspire this community to be food for the hungry, rest for the weary, and community for those who feel alone. Bless our words, lend us wisdom, and fill us with your love. Amen. It was really hard being a prophet. You'd have this person living their life, minding their own business, and then, of course, they'd hear a voice, God's voice. And that voice would tell them that they had been chosen to bring a message to the people, a message from God that they needed to hear so that they could make the changes they needed to ensure their future health and prosperity. The thing is, though, that the people, at least those people with any kind of power, usually didn't want to hear a message of change. If they wanted to change the way things they'd been doing it for a long time, they would have changed it. They didn't need a prophet to inform them that worshiping idols was wrong or that they were supposed to be taking care of their most vulnerable. They were doing what they did because they wanted to. And I'm sure they did not feel that they needed some prophet getting in their face and telling them how to live their lives. Today's reading is about the prophet Elijah. And before we get into the reading, unless you're completely familiar with the book of Kings, which I'm guessing most people are not, a little bit of context might be helpful. The king of Israel at the time was a guy named Ahab. It's a name that may sound familiar if you've read Moby Dick. Now, Ahab talked a good game. He professed his devotion to Yahweh, the God of Abraham and Sarah, the God of Israel. But in reality, he was worshiping in the temple of Baal, which was a sort of a group of false gods. This was kind of a family affair because his far more famous wife, Jezebel, was a priestess of Baal. Now, from God's perspective, this was seriously wrong. In the Ten Commandments, we're told right away, no other gods or idols. From a good of society perspective, this was terrible as well, because idolatry invariably led to, has always led to, and still leads to division between neighbors, between the rich and the poor, between the powerful and the increasingly powerless. From Ahab's point of view, however, worshiping idols was great. Why worship a God whose concern is the widow and the orphans when you can worship a God that promises wealth and power? Well, Elijah was sent by Yahweh to confront Ahab and give him the warning that unless he changed his ways, calamity was coming for him and his whole kingdom. Elijah challenged Ahab and Jezebel to a godly duel. On one side of this duel, you have 450 prophets of Baal, and on the other side, lonely old Elijah, on his own. Each team was to take a cow, cut it up, and have their God consume it with fire. The 450 spent their days dancing around and calling to Baal and yelling and screaming and making a giant fuss. Eventually, they even started cutting themselves so they could bleed onto the altar to try and get Baal to do something, anything. But nothing. No matter what they did, it didn't work. Elijah, though, made an altar of 12 stones, representing the 12 tribes of Israel, poured on some grain, and then drenched the whole thing in water. And then he simply said, "Answer me, O Lord, so that your people will know that you are God." Well, the next thing you know, the whole thing just bursts into flames. Even the stones burned. All the water evaporated, and the slaughtered cow was gone. The people fell to their knees and immediately started worshiping Yahweh, and then they seized the 450 Baalers and put them to death. Well, as you can imagine, this was a little bit upsetting to Jezebel, who then promised Elijah that she'd have him killed within a day. And Elijah's response to this threat? Well, he ran away. And that brings us to today's reading from Kings 19. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a solitary broom tree. He asked that he might die. "It is enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under that broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Get up and eat." He looked, and there by his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time, touched him, and said, "Get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you." He got up, he ate, and he drank, and he went through in the strength of that food for 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the Mount of God. Now, does this all seem kind of strange to you? We've just had this amazing display of power from God, summoned by Elijah. Like, really, this guy has some moves. If I could call down holy fire, I wouldn't be afraid of anything. I'd be doing that all the time. Campfires, lighting up the wood, and even if it's wet, piece of cake. And I know a few people that if I could call down fire, they better start wearing some serious sunscreen. But not Elijah. He literally runs for the hills. He lies down under what's called a broom tree and asks God to just let him die. So maybe it's not Jezebel's threat that caused him to flee. It seems that Elijah is welcoming death. No, I get the feeling that Elijah's problem is that it's all just too much. Elijah is suffering from the same malady that has plagued prophets and truth tellers and those who envision a better world. He's fed up. He's feeling that no matter what he does, no matter how clear he can display God's message, people are just going to go on with their own petty bickering and greed and idolatry and selfishness and complacency and just be their old rotten selves. He just called down fire, for heaven's sake. God has very clearly displayed the uselessness of these false gods, but for what? Ahab and Jezebel still are in power. They still hold the power of life or death over their subjects. And the people who are going to turn their lives to Yahweh because of this great display, well, if history tells, it's going to be a few that might change their ways, but after a few days, most of them are just going to go back to worshiping Baal because that's what they've always done. Does this seem familiar? When I read this last week, when I read about Elijah's frustration and how he just wants to leave the whole world behind, I thought of the growing number of doctors and nurses who have been walking off the job to go hide under their own metaphoric broom trees. So many of them are just simply fed up. They've worked so hard for so long to keep people safe in this pandemic, and now when they should be seeing the light at the end of a very dark tunnel, when vaccines should be paving the way to recovery, so many are saying, yeah, that burning cow thing was impressive, but I think I'll just keep worshiping Baal, or in this case, worshiping ego and willful ignorance, and turning away from vaccines in favor of conspiracy theory, all making this pandemic, in some places, worse than it ever was, completely preventable. Is it any wonder these doctors and nurses are just fed up? I myself have been so ready on so many occasions just to go and find my own broom tree. Well, there really are some who do want to work for an end to the racial strife that has plagued humanity forever. So many are still adding their own addendums to Jesus' command to love our neighbors. Oh yeah, love our neighbors? Well, unless they're gay or Muslim, or certainly that can't include people with different skin colors. And I'd love to think that the growing heat waves and droughts and floods and fires would lead people to take seriously the damage we're doing to God's creation. But nah, that seems like too much change, too much work. Sometimes I really do doubt that I can make any real difference. Like Elijah, I'm no better than my ancestors. Just leave me to my broom tree and leave me alone. But then God comes to Elijah, lets him have a good nap, gives him a nice piece of cake, and leads him back to the crucial work that he's been called to do. God recognizes his fatigue and frustration and leads him to Sabbath. This is so very important for all of us. Life can be really hard. Life can be so overwhelming. So many in the past year and a half have had to relearn how to do their jobs, relearn how to live and be in community. And now that things are opening back up, yes, there's joy in re-entering some kind of normalcy, but so much still seems unfamiliar. There's still stress and change and trepidation. Through all this, though, God not only leads us to rest, but God commands us to rest. It's one of the 10 commandments. This is no way an escape plan to abandon the worries of the world, but it's a chance to rejuvenate, recenter ourselves, and seek out the beauty of God's grace so that we are reminded what it is we are working for. One of the complaints that Elijah has that comes later in this chapter is that he feels alone. But he's not. God is with him, And God is with us every step of every moment. God leads him back to the city and points out allies, people who will assist him in his task of delivering God's message. God leads him to another prophet, Elisha, who Elijah will mentor and who will eventually take over for him. We too are not alone. God is with us and will not abandon us. And while the path of justice, the search for equality and respect for all people might seem like a lonely path, there are so many other searchers striving for the same thing. And ironically, they too are sometimes feeling that they are alone, that they cannot do any more than those in their past, those too who are looking for their broom tree. So maybe this is what God calls Christ's church to be. Maybe this is what St. Andrew's is being called to be. This could be the broom tree, where the tired can rest, have a piece of cake, and find inspiration for the journey ahead. Maybe this can be a place where God leads those who are feeling alone, who need to be reminded that God is calling not only us as individuals, but us as a community to participate in building what Jesus called the realm of God. Maybe this can be a place where people are bolstered with the holy courage to speak the holy truth that we are all God's children, all called to prophetic boldness, to point out the uselessness of the false gods that so many still worship, and instead proclaim the glory of the one true God and all that God is doing. Have a nap. Eat some cake. Be well nourished, for there is a lot of work to be done. Amen.